Okay, so for a practice activity, I'm going to supply you with this and I'd like you to work over top of it. So each one's named, but we're just going to work over a layer over top as practice. And I want you to try just a series of lines. So you can start off pretty basic. So for instance, scale back to where you're comfortable with the size against the canvas and maybe try to create lines that are nice and evenly dispersed. Now keep in mind with this, I'm actually pivoting off the back of my hand. And you see towards the middle, I lose control a little bit. But down towards these sides, I gain control and I can get a lot more even lines. So that right there tells me that I'm a little bit too close to the work. So I'll scale this back even further to again where my hand feels more comfortable. Now I may lose control edge to edge. So that's where the layer benefits me. And I'll just go ahead. I still feel a little loss of control in the middle, but not as much. And I want to just shoot past those edges if I need to. So all of us are going to be different. You may be very confident at this process and not need to scale back or whatever, but you have to test yourself. You have to try this. Now, I'm just going to race back the edges of this before I commit to it. So this is just one of the things that helps me get to the end result that I want. And then I might try to crosshatch this. So I'm going to rotate the canvas to what's more comfortable for my way of creating. Again, I'm going to scale back. Now, we know that we could just simply take this, drag it, flip it horizontally, and there we have cross-hatching really quick and easy, right? So that's the beauty of digital, but I'm actually going to force myself to just practice. So that's kind of the weird and neat thing about digital art, that some of this is so easy to do without doing the work, that you just copy and paste and scale and all this stuff. But there's other times you really need to force yourself to just practice. Ultimately, that's how you're going to get better. And a lot of people seem to think that when you work digitally, you're not doing the work. And that's not true. In fact, if you can't work traditionally well, then your digital work isn't going to be as effective as it could be, and vice versa. They're very much the same skill set, but it's very easy for people to say, well, there's so many tools in digital that you're not as good as a traditional artist, and that's just not true. But you do have to make time to force yourself to do the training. So in this sense, there's our crosshatch, nothing too amazing. And you see, even though I was going for consistent lines, that I wasn't really going for more interesting lines or tapered lines, they still happen that way because they're freehand. So they have a nice, interesting crosshatch to them anyways. Now, that's just one style that you might practice. You might say, let's try adding some other lines over here, and we're going to make these appear lighter by comparison, and we can do that by not cross-hatching them. And then maybe on the top, we do some that are kind of a half moon, so maybe the light is just kind of, hitting that top a little less, things like that. And then for the back here, we could say, well, we want this a little bit darker, so we'll bring some that are going just vertically, just like that. So you see that this is a great way to practice, and really you want to do this often. It's very easy to get caught up in the work and not take time to do things like this. You can erase some of these lines back, but you can create some really neat effects, and you can learn a lot by this because it's the same. All these basic shapes will apply to your more advanced work. You have to learn to start thinking about your work in that way. So for this sphere, I'm going to actually try to shade it through here, right about like that. And then I want to give some variation in this gradient that I want to bring up and over like this. So what I'm going to do is keep that shape in mind. And I'm also going to try to round these tapered lines. So I consider this a little bit more of an advanced kind of method. It's not particularly easy for a lot of people that start out. I don't know that it's particularly easy for me. I usually have to warm up to it. But it's very interesting looking, and it's highly versatile. It helps to really push the feeling of a rounded form because you're doing a couple things here. You're rounding with the shape, okay, and then you're also tapering the line, And then you're also adding variation in the way that these lines are created because they're so independently hand created. So it adds a very interesting look to the work. Now, I didn't quite get the shape that I want yet, but I also planned on cross-hatching this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to add a layer. I'm going to draw this shape like this, actually a little lower, like that, like that. And then I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to rotate this in the way that it's most comfortable for me to create these types of lines. And I would say something like this. And then now I want to do it again, and I'm actually going to go right through the shape itself. So I'm going to make it a little bit easier on myself. I also want to make sure to bring these pretty tight together, so I get that nice little diamond shape that I'm after. And it's kind of harder for me to focus on curving this, but it's very, very important to try to do this. And I think the more you do it, especially as you're rendering forms that you're used to rendering, say a character's arm or something that you perceive as being very rounded, then it becomes easier to round these shapes over. And I think I'm just a little bit rusty, but that's where stuff like this is so important to practice. I think that a lot of artists assume that we get really good, or somebody's really good and they don't need to practice anymore. And I totally have to say that's the wrong way to think about it. Like, the more you practice, the better you get, not the other way around. Now if you're completing work all the time, then I guess you could kind of just, chalk that up as your practice. But I still try to make time to practice, to experiment. Even though I work professionally, I still, make time to try to restudy and learn. Primarily because I just want my work to always be more impressive each, year on end. So let's rotate this around. Now I'm just erasing back with a translucent brush. I'll get rid of that line I used for reference. And you see I've got a nice gradation there, a fade. Again, I'm a big fan of using this negative line. I couldn't really see it there, but it's showing up. Make it a little bit bigger. So I kind of like that look. Double click here to straighten out the canvas. And so you can see now it's a pretty interesting look, and I can keep embellishing and improving upon that. Let's do the same thing over here with the cylinder. And with this one, I want to try a different series of lines. So I want to kind of challenge myself. I still want to do a curved line. I still want a shadow that goes through here, something like that. Let's almost think about a way that chrome shades. So chrome, will typically have this kind of thick to thin swirling pattern, something like this, or it starts off like this. And I'll just kind of be messy. I always think it looks better if you're a little bit messy with it at first anyways. So it starts thicker, and then you get these little tiny line breaks, tinier swirls. They kind of vary up a bit. Probably start off a little better if I have a sketch. And then some tinier little lines up here. Something like that. And then now some gradient lines at the bottom. So what I want to do here is, let's first erase back our edges like this. Oh, a little too much there. And so now I'm going to have a gradient from here down, like this, and here, a little bit lighter in the middle. So just so you know, generally what you're emulating here is that there's a reflection in the chrome object, and the reflection is really just a horizon or buildings in the distance or whatever you assume is reflecting in there, but it's generally distorted, and that's why you go with the swirl and the this kind of effect here. But the thing that I think is helpful to practice here is that the lines start tighter in succession and then they fade off like this. Same thing here. We could start tighter in succession and then fade off. And that's generally going to kind of give you this chromy look. Another thing you can do is you can do a glare line up top, kind of a starburst. So this is more probably a style choice that I like to do, but it kind of helps look like a, the hottest point, the highest point, because we got to remember it's spherical, it's rounding over, and that's why we're getting some shading to the bottom. And then also maybe some little cross hatching here with that same idea. And then it starts tighter and then it fades off. And it looks pretty plain without something on the side here. So let's say that, this side's just shaded like this. So on and so forth. So we could, and you can see I'm not tapering these lines. I'm just throwing those in with a singular pass, almost like the first example. But you can see how, to me anyways, based upon the style I like, really the most interesting one to me is the middle. I just really like those types of lines. So it's probably more of a style preference. So be sure to try this practice activity. Keep in mind, if you want me to view any of the work, whether it be this lesson or any of the other lessons we talked about, be sure to share the work. I'd love to see it, and I'll give you any feedback that I can. And keep in mind, I'm here to answer any questions you might have, so just let me know. And as always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and I will talk to you soon.